What's going on, guys? This is Robin. We are here with the conclusion of Batman and Superman fighting the anti-Superman, and God, the ending to this is absolutely dope. Okay, so what this does, picking up off the last video that we did, which I'll have as a pinned link down in the comment section, that what we have here is David basically being taught how to be a superhero alongside Batman, right? Now remember, David is from an alternate reality, so he's not really used to how things work when it comes to stuff on Earth. Now, one of the things that happens here is Batman, in teaching David to be a hero, actually has him face off against a villain like Ratcatcher. Now, the reason why Batman does that is because Ratcatcher doesn't really matter, but it's not as though you kind of throw him into the deep end with like Two-Face or the Riddler or anybody like that. But one of the things that Batman communicates with David is that if he's going to be a superhero on this Earth and he's going to operate on a broad level, he's gonna have to come to the understanding some places on Earth are darker than others, and Gotham City is the darkest. Like, Gotham City is not a place you move to on purpose, you know what I mean? Like, you end up there, like you're traveling through there, your car breaks down, somehow you run out of money, and now you're stuck. Like, that's how you end up in Gotham City. And so what we end up doing here is transitioning over to the Joker and the key. Now, here's the thing. One of the things you guys pointed out in the comment section, and I probably should have mentioned this in the last video, the key as he exists here is a reworked version of a very old character in DC Comics, that his powers are starkly different, or at least different enough that they can call him a new character, that he basically has the ability to kind of access virtually anywhere in existence. And one of the cool things about this story is that we're actually going to focus on how DC is changing things up with the multiverse, which is cool. And so what we end up finding out is the Joker arrives here on the scene with basically the angler of a guy called Angleman. Now, Angleman is kind of an interesting character. He's not overly important in DC Comics, but the device that he has, which is more often than not referred to as the Angler, has the ability to kind of relocate things based on the user's wishes. And it's also got other powers as well. But what matters in the confines of this story is that it allows them to achieve a measure of teleportation, because what ends up happening is that in the middle of David working alongside Superman and the Flash and so on, is you suddenly have just this massive flood that engulfs the city of Gotham out of nowhere. And the reason why this happens is because of the fact that what the Key and the Joker had done is, in the city of Gotham, they had literally deposited, using the powers of the Angler, this giant doorway. And then in turn, using the ability of the Key to open that doorway to basically anywhere he wants it to be, the doorway opens to Gotham Harbor, which basically just floods the entirety of Gotham City. Now, of course, this requires Batman, Superman, David, and all those guys to respond, only for us to find out it's a distraction. The reason why this all matters is because while the entire doorway and everything is wrapped up pretty quickly, that Batman and David have a moment together when Batman basically tells David he can't drive the Batmobile, but in a moment of distraction, the Joker and the Key yank David through a doorway that the Key created, and now David is in the clutches of the Joker. And here's what's so nuts about this, right? Like, as you guys know, when it comes to the Joker and sidekicks, killing sidekicks has kind of been his thing. Now, in the comments, people were like, no, that's not the Joker's main MO, but it kind of has been. Ever since, like, the death of Jason Todd, specifically with regards to Batman, there's always the ongoing fear that if Joker gets his hands on one of Batman's sidekicks, that the Joker will kill him. That's the concern here, because the first thing the Joker wants from David is he wants to know the identities of Batman and Superman. Now, what's kind of funny about this is, explicitly in this story, Batman told Superman, we're not giving David our secret identities. We don't know him well enough yet. We don't know him well enough to give him that information, because any number of things could happen. So the reality is that Joker's demanding information from David that David doesn't readily have, but in an effort to kind of coax him along, the Joker exposes David to the Joker toxin. Now, here's the thing. David's never encountered the Joker toxin before, and he's never experienced it. But for those of you guys who are familiar with DC Comics, as you know, there's varying degrees of the Joker toxin. Sometimes the toxin will kill you. Other times, it'll just make you temporarily insane. It just depends on what's being told in the story and what the Joker's own motivations are. But David, having never experienced this before, quite literally has a kind of psychotic break, right? Starts losing his mind and freaking out over the fact that everything he sees is basically just Joker. And so, of course, while David's being held hostage, you basically have Superman and Batman and the Teen Titans and those guys all hunting for David himself. What's so ironic about this, and this is something that's exceedingly important here, is Superman's reaction to this. Because as Batman is talking to Robin, what he tells him is, he says that Superman is incredibly angry at the Joker, but he's more angry at himself for basically putting David in the Joker's crosshairs, putting David out there as a superhero, and it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. And so that's a very important thing, and I want you to keep that in the back of your head as we get closer to the end of this video. And so one of the things that happens happens is Batman, kind of going through all these different buildings that are most likely being used by the Joker and the key, but finding virtually nothing, ends up discovering a single device out there where the serial number was not completely filed off by the key. And that by using this information alongside just this detective work, right, Batman's just, the power of the plot, Batman ultimately deduces exactly where they're operating out of. And so alongside Superman and the rest of the Teen Titans, they arrive at the headquarters of the Key and the Joker, only to enter through the doorway and then find a giant expanse of doors. And there's no telling where these lead to. And in fact, that's what makes this moment so cool, is because if they were to open one door, they could just be sucked into the vacuum of space and they would all die, except for Superman. If they were sucked through another door, they could end up in the bottom of the ocean. They could open a door and they could end up in 65 million years in the past. There's no way to know what would happen here. And it's one of the coolest things. Now, what DC's also gonna do in one of the most fun ways ever is they're gonna give us the most comic book logic thing that I think I've ever seen, and it's gonna be absolutely amazing. But jumping back over to David being held by the Joker and the Key, we get this really amazing moment. And this is one of the most important things to understand about what's happening here, right? So when David is talking to the Key, what he says, or at least what the Key says, is that David passed out after being beat over the head with a crowbar by the Joker. That's the Joker's MO when it comes to sidekicks. He basically beat Jason Todd nearly to death and then blew him up. So it's kind of been a thing with him and crowbars and sidekicks ever since. But what the Key says is that in his younger years, he grew up in this exceedingly small town, but he felt frustrated by how limited the minds were of not just himself, but everybody around him. So what he started doing was experimenting with psychotropic drugs in order to, quote unquote, unlock the 90% of the human brain that has potential, right? Because the old wives' tale is we only ever use 10% of our brain. Now, of course, DC's not really going with the old wives' tale version, and in fact, even the Key himself says that's malarkey, that's nonsense, right? At any given time over the course of a day, we're using the entirety of our brain in some capacity, right? It's not as though 90% is laying dormant, and if we can tap into that 90%, we can develop telepathy and telekinesis, and we can alter reality, and so on and so forth. And so what he did is by experimenting with these psychotropic drugs, he actually started breaking free of the limitations of the human brain, being able to experience and to understand things in a way that a human being simply just normally can't do. He's basically hyper-evolved his brain. That's really all he did. But the kicker to this is that his brain is always hungering for information. Now, what he says, and really when David asked the question, why are you allying yourself with the Joker? What the Key says is that he's basically working with the Joker because the Joker's agreed to provide him with some of his experimental psychotropic drugs. Now, the real question you have to ask here is, why would you buy drugs from the Joker? And why would you take drugs from the Joker? Because I promise you, my friend, that's a high you are never gonna come down from. It'll be bad. It'll be very, very bad. But the bigger reason why is because it allows the Key to experiment and sort of see how he feels about all this stuff. Now, I do want to say this as a disclaimer, you should never do any of that stuff, right? Never mess with that kind of stuff. I feel like that needs to be said because I know we have some younger people who do watch the YouTube channel. Having said that, what David says in an attempt to beg for his life is he reveals to the Key that he's not even from this universe, that he's from an alternate reality and arrived here on a spaceship. Now, this is huge. This is the single biggest moment to come out of this comic outside of the ending of this comic. And here's the reason why. What the Key realizes is that with David coming from an alternate reality, if you were to imagine the multiverse being a collection of houses on a block, all the Key needs is a key to the front door of his house, and then he can access any house he wants to. The multiverse becomes his playground. And so by David having a ship and having the means by which the Key can leave the universe, he in turn can do whatever he wants to with the multiverse. He can jump in and out of any universe using the ship. He'll always remember and he'll always be able to get back. The super comic book logic that I was talking about, right? That moment comes along when Batman and Superman and these guys are investigating all these doors. And then Batman and Superman both come to the realization that the Joker wears gloves, but the Key does not. So Superman, using his Superman powers, right? Superman becomes Batman, right? He uses like his Superman powers and then sees like a fingerprint on a door handle. And that's when he realizes that's the door they went through. It's the most MacGuffin thing ever, right? It is the most just convenient plot thing ever, but it is fun, right? This is one of the most fun stories that I think I've read in a long, long time. So honestly, I don't really mind. But of course, once they get into the room, the Joker's Joker's in the midst of just beating David with a crowbar, and that's when Superman says, step away from him. Now, what follows is one of the coolest moments. This is what I'm talking. This is what I'm talking about, guys. This is when things get cool. So immediately in response to Batman, Superman, the Teen Titans, and all these guys, the key opens a door which just leads to this giant monster coming in, and then the Joker makes his escape. David, despite being warned by everybody else, immediately goes after the Joker, and he manages to track him down in some gigantic, crazy-looking funhouse. Now, the reality of this is that David is not buying anything he sees, and he doesn't really care. Instead, he immediately goes after the Joker, and he manages to overpower him. But in this moment of extreme anger, he says, you tortured me, and you got off on it. If I lay eyes on you ever again, I swear I will kill you. I don't care if it's tomorrow or 20 years from now, I will kill you. And this is when we get the revelation. This is the origin story for Magog in DC Comics. Son, man, the anti-Superman if there ever was one. Dude, I love the character of Magog. It's so amazing because that's what this is, right? As you guys know, Magog killed the Joker. Like, it's what set everything off with his character, right? It's one of the coolest moments ever, right? Now, we'll talk about him here in a second, right? We'll talk about him here in a little bit because I know people who are not familiar with DC are like, who in the hell's Magog? Like, what in the world's going on with Magog? No, he is, dude, Magog is dope. Like, he's absolutely one of the coolest characters out there. Do you guys remember that story where he absolutely dominated Superman and it wasn't even close? Like, it wasn't even close, son. It was a man. I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. So what this does here, of course, is it picks up with David having not killed the Joker, but the Teen Titans basically chastising him because they had to pull David off the Joker. He was going to kill him, right? He was going to kill this guy. And that's when, like, literally David has to come to accept this fact that he can't just kill. He has to be able to control his anger. But even Batman sits down with Superman and says, look, I understand where you're coming from. You see David as not really even a sidekick, but more like somebody under your wing. You're his mentor. I would even go so far as to argue that it borderlines a kind of son type situation. But the reality here is nothing is curbing David's rage. He struggles with anger in a way that we simply just can't understand. Now, the reason behind this and the reason why it all matters so much is because in a lot of ways, David sees himself as the reason for why his family died in the first place. Remember, in the last video that we did, we never quite learned the full origin story of David. But one of the things that we found out here is that David being on this ship and arriving on Earth, they were designed to be vessels. There were originally 2 of them, and they were designed to be vessels that would basically explore the multiverse. They would chart the multiverse, not that dissimilar from what the Fantastic Four do in Marvel Comics. The problem with this is that David messing around with one of the ships ends up inadvertently blowing the ship up. And so when the time comes when, like, his world is basically ending, his parents have to send him away on the one ship that's available because it can only house one person, and David's sent away knowing that had he not messed with the second ship in the first place, his parents would be traveling alongside him as well. So he sees his actions as the reason for why they died. That and the fact that over the course of his life, there were moments when he could have stepped in to help people, but fear got the better of him and he ran away, leading to other people dying. So again, it's one of these things where he sees himself wanting to be a superhero, but nothing he's done over the course of his life has given him the impression that he's capable of doing it. Now, the reality here, and you know this, and I know this, and it's one of the things that just you learn to deal with over the course of your life. Everybody makes mistakes, everybody screws up, and nobody gets things perfect. But David hasn't quite figured that out yet, and so he carries a lot of guilt here. The problem is the potential actions of David's rage getting the better of him would lead to the death of anybody else who's out there. And right, wrong, or otherwise, the role of superheroes are to really be more humanitarian peacekeepers than to be like a police force, right? The police force is Earth 3, which we will cover because that story's dope. But the thing about this is that Superman ultimately ends up taking David and putting him inside of a device in the Fortress of Solitude that will basically expose him to the red sun radiation and basically neutralize his powers. But before he's able to pull the lever, Superman removes him, right? And he says, look, I'm not gonna take your powers away. I can do better, right? I can be better. Now again, a lot of why Superman is doing things that he wouldn't normally do, because under any normal circumstance, he would have been like, yeah, man, sorry about your luck, David. He would have pulled that lever and be like, I'll see you on the other side, home slice. And that would be it, right? But the reason why he's not doing that is because, again, he sees himself reflected in David because their origin stories are almost identical, right? Sent away from a dying world, their biological parents are dead, they arrive on a foreign planet that they don't know anything about, their powers start manifesting, they don't really know how they work, that when they arrive here, there really isn't any true moral compass. They kind of have to learn from the local natives on how things work in the world that they're in. There's a lot of similarities between these two characters. But if Superman and David are talking to each other, there's like a giant noise from down below in the Fortress of Solitude, only to find out the Key and the Joker have arrived and basically unlocked all these different animals. Now, the question you'd be asking yourself is, how did the Key and Joker find the Fortress of Solitude of Superman? Because it's the Fortress of Solitude. It's not easily found, right? Like, well, what we end up doing is jumping back to about 30 minutes before David was rescued by Batman and Superman when he was being interrogated by the Key. And what the Key had done in talking to David is that by exposing David to his own psychotropic drugs, in turn, he forced David to dump all the secrets, all the information that he has. Everything he knows about Batman, everything he knows about Superman, his origin story, his home world, how the multiverse works, or at least what limited knowledge he does have, how his ship works, how to turn it on, the whole 9 yards, right? In a matter of minutes, the Key got way more out of David than the Joker ever could have. And so as a distraction, what the Key ends up doing is releasing a whole bunch of different villains that have all in some form or fashion appeared in DC Comics over the years. They're not overly important. I always thought that Ferlin Nixley is one of the coolest villains out there. He was literally the son, at least I want to say he was the son of the landlady of Clark Kent, but maybe that was before the New 52. I don't remember off the top of my head. But the thing about this is that with the Key basically getting his hands on Superman, he opens a doorway which teleports Superman into the very chamber that's designed to shut down his powers. And so while the red sun radiation does not destroy Superman's powers, it does bring them down enough to where he's basically the version of Superman that he was in the New 52 when his powers were reduced and he was riding around in like the black Superman shirt on the motorcycle. But of course the Key, using this distraction, makes his way over to the ship of David and then intends to turn it on. But when David goes to make a move to defeat the Key simply says, freeze. And that's when we end up finding out that in the moment when he was messing with David's head using psychotropic drugs and learning everything that David had to say, the Key instilled a kind of subtle command in the mind of David that when the word freeze was stated, David wouldn't be able to move. And so in this moment, the Key pulls out what he calls the Master Key, right? This gun that basically breaks down matter on the molecular level, points it at David, but then Batman arrives just in time to save the life of David, and the Key's ultimately defeated. Now again, one of the things about this is that for a moment, David's anger almost gets the better of him, and he almost kills Key. But in turn, he stands down, right? And he says, I'm not gonna do that, right? I am not that person. Batman and Superman have taught me to be a better hero. I'm not going to destroy you. But the end is coming, folks. The end is coming. And let me tell you, man, it is dope, because what happens here, right? What happens here is that the Key had already activated the ship of David. And when that happened, David starts phasing, right? Literally starts phasing out of the entirety of the universe. And even when he asked Batman and Superman, like, is there anything you can do to help me? Their response is, there's nothing we can do. Like, there's literally nothing that we can do here. We don't know how to deactivate your ship or anything like that. And what ends up going on is David, as he phases, ultimately disappears. And when he's gone, he reappears on an alternate world met by a guy named Gog. This, my friends, is the origin story of how David became the Magog in DC Comics. Now, if you want to know more about Magog, make sure you check the link in the comments section, because that will send you to a story called Kingdom Come. And that is when Magog kills the Joker and just irrevocably changes the entire DC landscape. I like to refer to Kingdom Come as the DC Comics Civil War, because that's what it is. It's absolutely amazing. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.